Hey there, awesome viewers. Welcome to today's super cool story. But wait, before we jump in, I've got a fun question for you. I want you to grab your phone or computer and drop your answer in the comments below. Ready? Here it is. Have you ever had someone tell you no when all you wanted was to do something really simple, like eat a yummy ice cream cone, ride your bike, or maybe even cook a big, juicy burger on a barbecue grill? Oh man, isn't that the worst feeling ever? I bet it made you feel all grumpy inside, right? So, go ahead and tell me about it in the comments. I can't wait to read what you say. Oh, and while you're down there in the comments, let me know where you're watching from today. Are you in a big city with tall buildings? Or maybe a small town with lots of trees? Or are you super lucky and watching from the beach? I want to know. And hey, if you love stories about regular people like you and me beating the odds and doing amazing things, then hit that big, shiny subscribe button right now. It's totally free, and it means you'll never miss one of my awesome stories. Plus, it makes me do a happy dance every time someone subscribes. So, let's get started, woohoo. Now, picture this in your head, okay? Close your eyes for a second, but not really, because you need to keep watching, haha. Imagine a quiet little neighborhood called Sunny Hills. It's the kind of place where everything looks perfect like a picture in a storybook. Every house has a bright green lawn that's cut just right, like someone used a ruler to make it perfect. Every mailbox is super shiny, like it's brand new, even if it's been there for years. The flowers in everyone's gardens are all the same colors: red, yellow, and white, and they're planted in perfect little rows. It's almost like someone came in and said, "Nope, no messy stuff allowed here." But here's the thing about Sunny Hills, there are rules. Oh boy, are there rules? There are so many rules. It's like living in a game where someone's always telling you what you can and can't do. Want to paint your front door blue? Nope, sorry, that's against the rules. Want to put a basketball hoop in your driveway? Not allowed. Want to fly a kite in your own backyard? Nope, that's a big no-no, too. It's like every fun thing you can think of has a giant no sign slapped on it. Crazy, right? Now, in the middle of all the super strict, super perfect neighborhood lived a guy named Jake Parker. Jake wasn't super tall or super strong like a superhero. He didn't have a cape or a fancy car. He wasn't rich or famous. He didn't star in movies or cook on TV shows like those big shot chefs you see on the Food Channel. Nope, Jake was just a regular guy, like your dad or your uncle or maybe even you when you grow up. He worked at a hardware store, selling hammers, nails, screws, and all kinds of tools to people who wanted to build stuff. It wasn't a fancy job, but Jake liked it because he got to help people and talk about building things all day long. But here's what you need to know about Jake: he had two things he loved more than anything in the whole wide world. Want to guess what they were? Go ahead, take a second to think about it. Okay, I'll tell you. The first thing Jake loved was grilling juicy, delicious steaks on his barbecue grill. Oh man, just thinking about it makes my mouth water. Imagine a big, sizzling steak, all crispy on the outside and juicy on the inside, with that yummy smoky smell floating through the air. Jake would fire up his grill every weekend, and he'd cook steaks, burgers, hot dogs, and even corn on the cob. He'd put on his favorite apron, the one with little pictures of hamburgers all over it, and he'd flip those burgers like he was a barbecue king. The second thing Jake loved was relaxing in his backyard after a long day at work. Picture this: Jake would come home, kick off his work boots, grab a cold lemonade, and plop down in a big, comfy chair in his backyard. He'd listen to the birds chirping, feel the warm sun on his face, and just let all his worries float away. His backyard wasn't huge, but it was his special place, a place where he could just be himself and forget about all the boring stuff from the day. Now, Jake's backyard wasn't fancy like some of the other yards in Sunny Hills. He didn't have a big swimming pool or a giant fountain or one of those fancy gazebos with lights all over it. But he did have his trusty barbecue grill, and to Jake, that was worth more than all the pools and fountains in the world. That grill was his pride and joy. It wasn't shiny and new, it was kind of old and a little rusty, but Jake loved it anyway. He'd saved up his money for months to buy it, and every time he used it, he felt like the happiest guy in the world. But here's the thing nobody in Sunny Hills knew about Jake. Are you ready for this? It's a big secret, so lean in close, don't tell anyone. Behind Jake's friendly smile and his quiet hellos to his neighbors, Jake had a spark of rebellion inside him. What does rebellion mean, you ask? Well, it's like when someone tells you no or tries to boss you around, and instead of just saying okay, you think, nope, I'm going to find a way to do things my way. It's like when your teacher says, no talking in class, but you whisper to your friend anyway because you just can't help it. That's rebellion, a little fire inside you that says, I'm not giving up that easily. And let me tell you, Jake's fire of rebellion was about to blaze brighter than anyone in Sunny Hills could ever imagine. It was like a tiny matchstick at first, just sitting there, waiting. But soon, it was going to turn into a giant bonfire, a fire so big, it would light up the whole neighborhood and make everyone's jaws drop to the ground. How did it happen? What started it? Oh, I'm so glad you asked, because that's where the story gets really, really exciting. But I'm not going to tell you everything just yet, oh no, that would spoil the fun. You've got to keep watching, because the story is about to heat up, pun intended. Let me give you a little hint, though, to keep you guessing. It all started with one tiny, annoying problem. Want to know what it was? Was it a big storm that broke Jake's grill? Nope, guess again. Was it a mean dog that stole all his burgers? Haha, nope, not that either. Was it a silly rule that tried to take away the one thing Jake loved most? Ding, 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 you're getting warmer. But I'm not going to tell you the whole story just yet. You've got to stick around, because this problem, this tiny, annoying problem, was about to turn Jake's quiet little life upside down. And trust me, it's going to be so much fun to watch it all unfold. Now, let's talk about Sunny Hills a little more, because this neighborhood is super important to our story. Remember how I said it was perfect? Well, it wasn't perfect for everyone. Sure, the lawns were perfect, and the mailboxes were perfect, but for someone like Jake, all those rules made it feel like a place where fun wasn't allowed. Imagine if you lived in a place where you couldn't ride your bike, couldn't draw with chalk on the sidewalk, and couldn't even have a lemonade stand without someone saying, nope, that's against the rules. That's what Sunny Hills was like for Jake. And who made all these rules, you ask? Oh, I'm so glad you asked, because that's where the real trouble starts. There was a group in Sunny Hills called the HOA, short for Homeowners Association. Think of it like a club, but not a fun club like a soccer team or a book club. No, this was a club where a few bossy people got to make rules for everyone else. And the leader of this club was a lady named Mrs. Karen Thompson. Oh boy, was she a piece of work. Karen loved rules more than Jake loved barbecue sauce, and trust me, Jake really loved barbecue sauce. Karen had rules for everything. Want to hang a swing in your tree? Nope, against the rules. Want to put a funny sign in your yard? Nope, not allowed. Want to have a barbecue grill in your backyard? Big no-no. Karen carried around a clipboard everywhere she went, and she was always writing down things she didn't like. If your grass was 1 inch too tall, she'd write it down. If your mailbox had a tiny scratch, she'd write it down. If you waved at her and didn't smile big enough, she'd probably write that down, too. Now, Jake didn't pay much attention to Karen at first. He was too busy grilling his steaks and relaxing in his backyard. He'd see her walking around the neighborhood, her clipboard clutched tight, but he'd just smile and wave and think, oh, that's just Karen being Karen. He didn't think those rules would ever mess with his life. But oh boy, was he wrong. That tiny, annoying problem I mentioned earlier? It had Karen's name written all over it. And when it showed up, it was like a big, dark cloud rolling over Jake's sunny day. Want to know what happened? Want to know how Jake's spark of rebellion turned into a giant fire? Want to know how one tiny problem turned into the wildest, most amazing adventure Sunny Hills had ever seen? Well, you've got to keep watching, because the story is just getting started. I promise, it's going to be so much fun, and there are surprises around every corner. So, grab a snack, get comfy, and let's see what happens next, because trust me, you don't want to miss a single second of this. So, what was the problem? Oh boy, it was a big one. Let me tell you all about it, but first, let's talk about something super important in Sunny Hills. Sunny Hills had something called an HOA. Now, you might be thinking, what's an HOA? Don't worry, I'm going to explain it in a way that's super easy to understand, even if you're just a kid like me. An HOA is short for Homeowners Association. Think of it like a club, but not a fun club like a soccer team or a video game club. Nope, this club is all about rules, lots and lots of rules. It's like a club where a few bossy people get to make rules for everyone else, even if those rules don't make any sense. Imagine if you had a treehouse in your backyard, and you made a club with your friends. But instead of having fun, your club was all about telling everyone what they can't do. No eating snacks in the treehouse. No laughing too loud. No wearing red shirts. That's what the HOA in Sunny Hills was like. It was a club that loved saying no to everything fun. And guess what? The people in this club thought they were super important, like they were the kings and queens of the neighborhood. Now, the leader of this HOA club was a lady named Mrs. Karen Thompson. Oh boy, was she a piece of work. What does a piece of work mean, you ask? Well, it's a fun way of saying someone is really, really hard to deal with, like when your little brother keeps stealing your toys, or when your dog chews up your favorite sneakers. Karen was like that, but worse. She wasn't just bossy, she was super bossy. She wasn't just strict, she was super strict. And she didn't just like rules, she loved rules. In fact, Karen loved rules more than Jake loved barbecue sauce. And trust me, Jake really loved barbecue sauce. He'd put it on his burgers, his steaks, his hot dogs, and even his corn on the cob. Jake thought barbecue sauce was the best thing ever, but Karen? She thought rules were the best thing ever. Karen had rules for everything in Sunny Hills. Want to know what kind of rules she had? Okay, let's imagine you live in Sunny Hills, and I'll tell you what Karen would say. Ready? Here we go. If you want to paint your front door a fun color, like bright blue or sunny yellow, Karen would say, nope, against the rules. All doors have to be boring beige or plain white. If you want to hang up a cool sign in your yard that says, lemonade stand 25 cents. Karen would say, nope, against the rules. No signs allowed, even if they're super cute. If you want to plant flowers in your garden, like big, purple ones or funny, spiky ones, Karen would say, nope, against the rules. Only red, yellow, and white flowers are allowed, and they have to be in perfect little rows. If you want to cut your grass but it grows a tiny bit too tall, like 1 extra inch, Karen would say, nope, against the rules. Your grass has to be exactly 2 inches tall, no more, no less. And yep, you guessed it, if you want to have a barbecue grill in your backyard, Karen would say, nope, against the rules. Grills are ugly, and they're dangerous, and I don't like them, so you can't have one. See what I mean? Karen had rules for everything, and she loved making sure everyone followed them. She even carried around a big clipboard everywhere she went, like it was her best friend. On that clipboard, she'd write down every little thing she didn't like. If your mailbox had a tiny scratch, she'd write it down. If your dog barked 1 time too many, she'd write it down. If you smiled at her but didn't wave, she'd probably write that down, too. Karen was like a detective, but instead of solving mysteries, she was looking for rule breakers. And when she found one, oh boy, she'd get so excited, like she'd just won a big prize at the school fair. Now, let's talk about Jake again, because this story is all about him. Remember how much Jake loved his barbecue grill? It was his favorite thing in the whole wide world, even more than his comfy backyard chair or his cold lemonade. Jake's grill wasn't fancy or shiny, it was kind of old and a little rusty, but to Jake, it was perfect. He'd saved up his money for months to buy it, working extra hours at the hardware store. Every time he used it, he felt like the happiest guy in Sunny Hills. He'd fire up the grill, put on his favorite apron, the one with little pictures of hamburgers all over it, and flip those burgers like he was a barbecue king. The smell of sizzling steaks and juicy burgers would float through the air, and Jake would smile and think, this is the life. But one sunny Saturday, everything changed. Oh boy, this is where the trouble starts, so listen close. It was a perfect day, bright blue sky, warm sun, and not a single cloud in sight. Jake was in his backyard, doing what he loved best. He had his grill fired up, and the delicious smell of barbecue was wafting through the air. What does wafting mean, you ask? It's a fancy word for when a smell floats around, like when your mom bakes cookies and the yummy smell goes all through the house. That's what Jake's barbecue smelled like, yummy, smoky, and so good, it made your tummy rumble just thinking about it. Jake was flipping burgers, humming a happy tune, when suddenly trouble marched right into his yard. And by trouble, I mean Mrs. Karen Thompson. Karen didn't walk into Jake's yard like a normal person, oh no. She marched in, like she was a general in an army, ready to fight a big battle. Her clipboard was clutched tight in her hands, and her eyes were squinting like she was looking for something to be mad about. "Mr. Parker," she snapped, her voice loud and sharp, like when your teacher catches you chewing gum in class. Jake jumped a little, his spatula frozen mid-air, right above a sizzling burger. He turned to look at Karen, and his heart sank. "Uh-oh," he thought. "This can't be good." "What's wrong, Mrs. Thompson?" Jake asked, trying to sound nice, even though he already knew Karen was up to no good. Karen pointed at Jake's grill, her finger shaking like she was so mad she could explode. "This grill is against HOA rules," she shouted. "It's an eyesore, and it's dangerous. You have 1 week to get rid of it, or you'll be fined $500. Now, let's stop for a second and talk about what Karen said, because she used some big words that might sound confusing. Don't worry, I'm going to explain them super easy, okay? When Karen said the grill was an eyesore, she meant she thought it was ugly. Like, imagine if you drew a picture and someone said, "Ew, that's ugly." That's what Karen was saying about Jake's grill, even though Jake thought it was awesome. And when she said it was dangerous, she meant she thought it could cause trouble, like starting a fire. But Jake was super careful with his grill. He always turned it off when he was done, and he never left it on by accident. So, really, it wasn't dangerous at all. And then there was that word fined. What does fined mean, you ask? Well, it's when someone makes you pay money because you broke a rule. It's like if your mom said, "If you don't clean your room, you have to give me $5 from your piggy bank." That's a fine. And Karen was saying Jake would have to pay $500. Yikes, that's a lot of money, if he didn't get rid of his grill in 1 week. Jake blinked, his spatula still frozen mid-air. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "But, it's just a grill," he said, trying to stay calm. He didn't want to yell or be mean, because Jake was a nice guy. He just wanted to understand why Karen was so mad about something so small. But Karen didn't care what Jake thought. Oh no, she was too busy being the queen of rules. She smirked, her eyes gleaming like she'd just won a prize. What does smirk mean, you ask? It's when someone smiles, but not in a nice way. It's like when your big sister says, "Ha, I got the last cookie, and you didn't." That's a smirk, and Karen was smirking big time. "Rules are rules, Mr. Parker," she said, her voice all snooty and proud. "And I'm here to enforce them." What does enforce mean, you ask? It's another big word, but don't worry, I'll make it super easy. Enforce means to make sure everyone follows the rules, even if they don't want to. It's like when your teacher says, "Everyone has to line up quietly, and I'm going to stand here and make sure you do it." That's enforcing the rules, and Karen loved doing it more than anything. With a dramatic huff, imagine a big, loud sigh, like when your little brother is mad because he can't have more candy. Karen turned on her heel and stormed off. Her shoes clicked on the sidewalk, and her clipboard bounced in her hands. She didn't even say goodbye or wave or anything. She just left Jake standing there, burger in hand, wondering how his perfect weekend had gone so wrong. Jake looked down at his grill, the flames still flickering, the burgers still sizzling. He shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. "Just a grill," he muttered to himself. "What's the big deal?" But deep down, Jake knew this wasn't just about a grill. This was about Karen trying to boss him around, trying to take away the one thing that made him happy. And that made Jake's tummy feel all twisty and grumpy inside, like when someone takes your favorite toy and says, "You can't play with it anymore." Now, let's stop for a second and think about what most people would do in Jake's shoes. Imagine if this happened to you, okay? Let's say you have a super cool bike, and you love riding it in your driveway. But one day, someone comes up to you and says, "Nope, no bikes allowed. Get rid of it, or you have to pay $500. What would you do? Well, most people would probably grumble a little, like when you have to eat broccoli even though you don't like it, and then they'd pack up their bike and put it in the garage. They'd be mad, sure, but they'd think, "Oh well, I don't want to get in trouble, so I'll just do what they say." And that's what Karen thought Jake would do, too. She thought Jake was just a regular guy who'd say, "Okay, fine, I'll get rid of my grill." She thought she'd won, just like she always did when she bossed people around with her clipboard and her rules. But oh boy, was Karen wrong. See, Jake wasn't like most people. Oh no, not at all. Karen had no idea who she was messing with, and that was her biggest mistake. Here's the thing about Jake, and this is super important, so listen close, okay? Jake wasn't just a hardware store guy. He wasn't just a regular guy who liked grills and lemonade and comfy chairs. Nope, Jake had a secret, a big, awesome secret that nobody in Sunny Hills knew about. Want to know what it was? Oh, I bet you do. But I'm not going to tell you just yet, haha, that would spoil the fun. You've got to keep watching, because the secret is going to make the story so exciting, your eyes will pop out of your head. But I will give you a tiny hint, okay? Just a little one, to keep you guessing. Jake's secret was a skill, a special thing he was really, really good at. It wasn't something silly, like being able to wiggle his ears or burp the alphabet. Nope, it was something big, something amazing, something that was going to turn Karen's silly little rule into a giant problem for her. And when Karen's rule came up against Jake's secret, oh boy, it was like a tiny matchstick trying to fight a huge bonfire. Guess who was going to win? Yep, you guessed it, Jake. And here's the best part, Karen's little rule, the one she thought was so important, was about to spark something huge. What does spark mean, you ask? It's when something small, like a tiny flame, starts something big, like a giant fire. Imagine if you drop a tiny piece of popcorn in a pan, and suddenly, it pops into a big, fluffy piece of popcorn. That's a spark. And Karen's rule was like that tiny piece of popcorn, ready to pop into something so big, so awesome, that the whole neighborhood would be talking about it for years. What was Jake's secret? What was going to happen next? How was Jake going to turn this big, grumpy problem into something amazing? Oh, I'm so glad you asked, because things are about to get really interesting. But you've got to stick around, because the story is just heating up, and trust me, you don't want to miss a single second of it. Over the next few days, Jake didn't say a word. Not one single word. He didn't argue with Karen, even though she'd been super mean about his grill. He didn't complain to his neighbors, even though he was super mad inside. He didn't yell or stomp his feet or throw a big fit, like you might do if someone took away your favorite toy. Nope, Jake was quiet. Super quiet. But that didn't mean he was giving up. Oh no, not at all. Jake was watching. Watching and waiting, like a sneaky cat waiting to pounce on a toy mouse. Every morning, Jake would peek out his window, sipping his coffee, and watch Karen patrolling the neighborhood. What does patrolling mean, you ask? It's a big word, but don't worry, I'll make it super easy. Patrolling is when someone walks around looking for trouble, like a superhero looking for bad guys, but Karen wasn't a superhero. Oh no, she was more like a rule monster, always hunting for something to be mad about. She carried her clipboard in her hands, holding it tight like it was a magic wand that could make rules appear out of thin air. And oh boy, did Karen find things to be mad about. She was like a detective, but instead of solving mysteries, she was looking for tiny violations. What's a violation, you ask? It's another big word, but it just means breaking a rule. Like, if your teacher says, no running in the hallway, and you run anyway, that's a violation. Karen loved finding violations, and she wrote down every single one on her clipboard, scribbling so fast her pen almost caught fire. Let me tell you about some of the silly things Karen found, okay? It'll make you laugh, because her rules were so ridiculous. One neighbor, Mr. Johnson, got a warning for having a crooked mailbox. Yep, you heard that right, a crooked mailbox. His mailbox wasn't perfectly straight, it was tilted just a tiny bit to the left, like it was taking a little nap. But to Karen, that was a huge problem. This is a violation, she shouted, pointing at the mailbox like it had committed a crime. Fix it, or you'll get a fine. Poor Mr. Johnson just scratched his head and said, but, it's just a mailbox. Then there was Mrs. Garcia, who loved flowers. She planted some big, purple flowers in her garden because purple was her favorite color. But guess what? Karen didn't like purple flowers. Oh no, she only liked red, yellow, and white flowers, the approved colors in her silly rule book. So, Karen marched right up to Mrs. Garcia's house, her clipboard in hand, and said, These flowers are the wrong kind. This is a violation. You have to dig them up, or you'll be fined $100. Mrs. Garcia was so sad, because she loved her purple flowers, but Karen didn't care. To Karen, rules were more important than anything, even pretty flowers. And every time Karen walked by Jake's house, oh boy, she'd give him a smug little smile. What does smug mean, you ask? It's another big word, but it's easy to understand. Smug is when someone smiles in a mean way, like they think they're better than you. It's like when your big brother says, "Ha, I beat you at video games, and you'll never win." That's a smug smile, and Karen's smile was the smuggest of all. She thought she'd already won, you see. She thought Jake was going to pack up his grill, say okay, fine, and give up, just like everyone else in Sunny Hills. But oh boy, was she wrong. See, while Karen was busy patrolling and writing down violations, Jake wasn't sitting still. Oh no, not at all. Behind closed doors, Jake was busy. Super busy. Imagine if you were planning a secret surprise party for your best friend. You wouldn't tell anyone, right? You'd keep it all hush-hush, sneaking around, making plans, and giggling to yourself because you knew it was going to be awesome. That's what Jake was doing, but his surprise wasn't a party, it was something even bigger, something that was going to make Karen's jaw drop to the ground. Now, here's the secret nobody in Sunny Hills knew about Jake, and this is super important, so listen close, okay? Jake wasn't just a hardware store clerk. Nope, he was way more than that. Jake was a builder. What does builder mean, you ask? It's someone who makes things, like houses, tree houses, or even cool stuff like go-karts. Ever since Jake was a little kid just a bit older than you, he loved making things. When he was your age, he built a treehouse in his backyard all by himself. It had a ladder, a little window, and even a rope to climb up, like a pirate ship in the sky. His friends thought it was the coolest thing ever, and Jake was so proud of it. When Jake got a little older, he built a go-kart. What's a go-kart, you ask? It's like a tiny car you can race around, but it doesn't have a big engine like a real car. Jake made one out of old bike wheels, a wooden box, and some screws he found in his dad's garage. He painted it bright red and zoomed around the driveway, laughing and shouting, "I'm the fastest kid in the world." And then, when Jake's mom wanted a mini windmill for her garden, those spinning things that look like tiny wind turbines, Jake built one of those, too. It was small, but it spun in the wind, and his mom loved it so much, she gave him a big hug and said, "Jake, you're amazing." And guess what? Jake didn't stop building when he grew up. Oh no, he kept going. At the hardware store where he worked, Jake spent years learning about tools, blueprints, and construction. What are those things, you ask? Let me explain super easy, okay. Tools are things like hammers, screwdrivers, and saws, stuff you use to build things. Blueprints are like maps, but instead of showing you how to get to the park, they show you how to build something, like a house or a treehouse. And construction? That's just a fancy word for building stuff, like putting together a big Lego set, but with real wood and nails instead of plastic bricks. Jake wasn't just good at building stuff, he was amazing at it. He was like a superhero, but instead of flying or shooting webs, his superpower was making things. If you gave Jake a pile of wood, some nails, and a hammer, he could turn it into a chair, a table, or even a whole shed to keep your bike in. And the best part? Nobody in Sunny Hills knew about Jake's superpower. Not Karen, not Mr. Johnson, not Mrs. Garcia, nobody. It was his big, awesome secret, and he kept it hidden, like a treasure chest buried under the sand. So, while Karen thought she'd crush Jake's barbecue dreams like when you step on a sandcastle and think it's gone forever, Jake was sketching plans. Big plans. Super big plans. What does sketching mean, you ask? It's just a fancy word for drawing, like when you draw a picture of a dog or a spaceship in your notebook. But Jake wasn't drawing dogs or spaceships. Oh no, he was drawing something way cooler, something that was going to make Karen's jaw drop so far, it would hit the ground and bounce. Jake stayed up late every night, sitting at his kitchen table with a big piece of graph paper. What's graph paper, you ask? It's paper with lots of little squares on it, like a checkerboard, and it helps you draw things super straight and neat. Jake used a pencil and a ruler to draw his plans, making sure every line was perfect. He measured his backyard, too, using a big, Long tape measure, the kind that rolls up into a little box, like a snake curling up to sleep. He wrote down numbers, like how long his backyard was, how wide it was, and how tall things could be without breaking any rules. And then, Jake made lists of supplies. What are supplies, you ask? They're just the things you need to build something, like when you need crayons, paper, and glue to make a craft at school. Jake's supplies weren't crayons, though. Oh no, he needed big stuff, like wood, nails, screws, bricks, and even a shiny sink. Yep, a sink, like the one in your kitchen where you wash dishes. Jake wrote down everything he needed on his list, checking it twice, like Santa Claus making sure he has all the toys for Christmas. Every night, when he finished drawing and measuring and making lists, Jake would look at his plans and smile. He'd whisper to himself, if they won't let me have a grill, fine. I'll build something better. Something they can't stop. What does that mean, you ask? It means Jake wasn't giving up, oh no. It means he was going to fight back, but not by yelling or arguing. Nope, he was going to fight back by building something so awesome, so amazing, that Karen's silly rules wouldn't matter anymore. Now, let's talk about Karen again, because she was still patrolling the neighborhood, thinking she was the queen of everything. She thought Jake was scared of her, you see. She thought he was sitting at home, sad and grumpy, packing up his grill and saying, oh well, I guess I lost. But Jake wasn't sad or grumpy. Oh no, he was excited. He was like a kid on Christmas Eve, waiting for Santa to come, because he knew his big plan was going to be the best surprise ever. And then, one evening, something super exciting happened. Oh boy, this is where the story gets really, really fun, so listen close, okay. A big delivery truck rolled into Sunny Hills. What's a delivery truck, you ask? It's like a giant van, but instead of carrying people, it carries boxes and stuff you order, like when your mom orders a new toy for you online, and it comes in a big brown box. This truck was huge, though way bigger than the ones that bring toys. It was so big, it took up almost the whole street, and its engine made a loud rumbling sound, like a dragon waking up from a nap. Neighbors peeked out their windows, their noses pressed against the glass, trying to see what was going on. What's that truck doing here? They whispered to each other. Who ordered something so big? Kids ran outside, jumping up and down, shouting, wow, look at that truck. It's huge. Even the dogs in the neighborhood started barking, like they knew something exciting was happening. The truck stopped right in front of Jake's house, and the driver hopped out, carrying a big clipboard of his own, not a rule clipboard like Karen's, but a delivery clipboard to keep track of all the boxes. The back of the truck opened up, and out came huge boxes, giant, enormous boxes, bigger than your fridge, bigger than your bed, bigger than anything you've ever seen. The driver and his helper unloaded them one by one, stacking them in Jake's backyard. Thump. 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 Each box made a loud noise as it hit the ground, and the neighbors whispered even louder, what's in those boxes? What's Jake up to? And guess who was watching all of this, her eyes squinting like a grumpy cat? Yep, you guessed it, Karen. Karen, of course, was suspicious. What does suspicious mean, you ask? It's when you think someone is up to something sneaky, like when your little sister hides a cookie behind her back, and you think, she's up to no good. Karen stood on the sidewalk, her clipboard in hand, scribbling notes so fast, her pen almost broke. This better not be another violation, she muttered to herself, her voice low and grumpy. I'll be watching you, Mr. Parker. But Jake? Oh, Jake wasn't worried at all. Nope, not one bit. He just stood in his driveway, watching the boxes pile up, and he smiled. He even waved at Karen, giving her a big, friendly wave, like he didn't have a care in the world. But inside, Jake was giggling to himself, because he knew something Karen didn't. He knew what was in those boxes, and he knew what he was planning, and he knew it was going to be the biggest, best surprise Sunny Hills had ever seen. What was in those boxes, you ask? Oh, I bet you want to know. Was it a giant bounce house? Nope, guess again. Was it a swimming pool? Nope, not that either. Was it something so big, so awesome, that it would make Karen's rules look silly? Ding, 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 you're getting warmer. But I'm not going to tell you just yet, oh no. You've got to keep watching, because the big moment is coming up next, and trust me, it's going to be so exciting, you'll jump out of your seat. The day of reckoning arrived on a bright Saturday morning. What does reckoning mean, you ask? Oh, don't worry, it's just a big word, but I'll make it super easy for you to understand. Reckoning is like the big moment in a game when you finally beat the bad guy, or when you finish a race and win the prize. It's the moment when everything comes together, and everyone finds out who's really the best. And let me tell you, this Saturday morning was going to be the biggest reckoning Sunny Hills had ever seen. The whole neighborhood was buzzing. What does buzzing mean, you ask? It's another big word, but it's easy to understand. Buzzing is when everyone is super excited, like bees buzzing around a flower, talking and whispering and jumping up and down because something big is happening. And oh boy, was something big happening. For weeks, Jake had been working in his backyard, hidden behind tall tarps. What are tarps, you ask? They're big pieces of plastic or cloth, like giant blankets, that you can use to cover things up so nobody can see what you're doing. Jake had hung up these tarps all around his backyard, like a secret fort, so nobody, not even nosy Karen, could peek inside. And let me tell you, Jake had been super busy behind those tarps. Hammers banged, like when you hit a nail into a piece of wood, bang, bang, bang. Saws buzzed, like when you cut a big stick in half, bzzz, bzzz, bzzz. And strange smells floated through the air, like fresh cut wood, which smells all clean and woody, and paint, which smells kind of sharp and funny, like when you paint a picture but with big cans instead of little bottles. The neighbors could hear all these noises and smell all these smells, but they couldn't see what Jake was doing. It was like a big, giant mystery, and everyone was trying to guess what was going on. "Jake's up to something," Mr. Johnson whispered to Mrs. Garcia, scratching his head. "But what is it?" "Maybe he's building a rocket ship," little Timmy shouted, jumping up and down, because Timmy loved rocket ships. "Nah, maybe it's a giant slide," said Sarah, Timmy's big sister, because Sarah loved slides. "But Karen?" Oh boy, Karen wasn't excited like the kids. Nope, she was furious. What does furious mean, you ask? It's when you're so mad, you feel like you might explode, like a volcano full of hot lava. Karen was stomping around the neighborhood, her clipboard in her hands, muttering to herself, "What is he doing back there? This better not be against the rules." Every time she walked by Jake's house, she'd stop and glare at the tarps, squinting her eyes like a grumpy cat, trying to see through them. But she couldn't see a thing, and that made her even madder. One day, Karen got so mad, she decided to do something about it. She marched right over to Jake's fence, her shoes clicking on the sidewalk, her clipboard clutched tight. "I'm going to find out what's going on," she said to herself, her voice all sharp and grumpy. She was ready to barge in, like when your little brother bursts into your room without knocking, shouting, "What are you doing?" But before she could push open the gate and storm into Jake's backyard, something amazing happened. Oh boy, this is the best part, so listen close, okay? Jake stepped out of his front door, a huge grin on his face. What's a grin, you ask? It's a big, happy smile, like when you win a prize at the school fair, or when your mom says, "Yes, you can have ice cream." Jake's grin was so big, it stretched from one ear to the other, and his eyes were twinkling like stars. He wasn't scared of Karen, oh no. He wasn't worried about her clipboard or her rules. Nope, Jake was excited, because he knew something Karen didn't. He knew this was going to be the biggest, best moment in Sunny Hills history, and he couldn't wait to show everyone what he'd been working on. "Hey, Karen." Jake called, his voice loud and happy, like he was inviting her to a party. "Why don't you come see for yourself? Everyone else is welcome, too." Karen stopped in her tracks, her clipboard frozen in her hands. "See what?" she snapped, her voice all suspicious, like when your teacher thinks you're hiding gum in your desk. But Jake just kept grinning, not saying a word, because he knew the best way to answer her was to show her. And oh boy, the neighbors heard Jake's call, and they came running. Neighbors poured out of their houses, curious and confused, like ants running to a picnic. What does curious mean, you ask? It's when you really, really want to know something, like when you see a big present under the Christmas tree and think, "What's inside?" Mr. Johnson ran out, still holding his coffee cup, spilling a little on his shirt. Mrs. Garcia came out, her gardening gloves still on, dirt smudged on her cheeks. Little Timmy and Sarah ran out, shouting, "Yay, a surprise." Even the dogs in the neighborhood started barking, like they wanted to see, too. Karen, of course, led the charge, because she always had to be first. She held her clipboard in front of her, like a shield, ready to write up every violation she could find. "This better not be against the rules," she muttered, her eyes squinting even harder, her pen already out, ready to scribble. She thought she was going to catch Jake breaking a rule, and oh boy, she couldn't wait to say, "Aha! I got you." But oh boy, was she in for a surprise. Everyone gathered around Jake's backyard, standing on the sidewalk, peeking over the fence, trying to see past the tall tarps. The air was full of excitement, like when you're waiting for the fireworks to start on the 4th of July. And then, Jake did it. He grabbed the edge of one of the tarps, his grin getting even bigger, and he pulled it down. Whoosh! The tarp fell to the ground, like a magician pulling a cloth off a magic trick, and everyone gasped. What does gasp mean, you ask? It's when you suck in a big breath of air because you're so surprised, like when you see a giant cake at a birthday party, or when your dad says, "Surprise, we're going to the zoo." Everyone gasped. Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Garcia, little Timmy, Sarah, even the dogs stopped barking for a second, their mouths open in surprise. And what did they see? Oh boy, this is the best part, so listen close, okay. There, in Jake's backyard, was the most incredible outdoor kitchen anyone had ever seen. It wasn't just a kitchen, it was a masterpiece. What does masterpiece mean, you ask? It's when something is so amazing, so perfect, it's like the best painting or the best Lego castle you've ever built. Jake's outdoor kitchen was like that, but even better, because it was real, not just a picture or a toy. Let me tell you all about it, okay? Picture this in your head, and I'll make it super easy for you to imagine. First, there was a gleaming stone counter that stretched across the yard. What does gleaming mean, you ask? It's when something is super shiny, like a brand new bike or a mirror that sparkles in the sun. This counter was made of big, smooth stones, all stuck together, and it was so shiny, you could see your face in it, like looking in a puddle after it rains. And on top of this counter? Oh boy, not one, but two huge grills. Yep, two grills, bigger and shinier than Jake's old one, with lots of buttons and knobs, like the control panel of a spaceship. Next to the grills, there was a shiny sink, sparkling in the sunlight. What's a sink doing outside, you ask? Well, Jake had hooked it up to a water line all by himself, so he could wash dishes or rinse veggies right there in his backyard. It was like having a kitchen outside, but way cooler, because you could feel the sun on your face while you washed up. The sink was so shiny, it looked like it was made of silver, and it had a big faucet that sprayed water, like a mini waterfall. In the corner of the yard, there was a pizza oven made of red brick. What's a pizza oven, you ask? It's like a big, hot box where you can bake pizzas, just like the ones you get at a pizza place, but even better, because you can make them yourself. This pizza oven was tall and round, with a little chimney on top, and it looked like a tiny house for pizzas. Jake had built it all by himself, stacking the bricks one by one, like building a Lego tower, but with real bricks instead of plastic ones. And then, there was a wooden pergola shading a brand new dining table. What's a pergola, you ask? It's like a roof, but not a solid one. It's made of wooden beams with gaps in between, so the sun can peek through, but it still gives you shade. Jake's pergola was big and strong, made of smooth wood, and it covered a dining table that could seat 10 people. Imagine having a picnic in your backyard, but instead of sitting on the grass, you're sitting at a fancy table under a cool pergola, eating burgers and pizza and drinking lemonade. That's what Jake had built. And that's not all. Oh no, there was more. String lights twinkled overhead, hanging from the pergola, like tiny stars in the sky. What are string lights, you ask? They're little lights on a string, like the ones you see at Christmas, but these were for every day, not just holidays. They twinkled and glowed, making the whole backyard look magical, like a fairy tale. And in the corner, there was a mini fridge, humming quietly, stocked with cold drinks. What's a mini fridge, you ask? It's a tiny refrigerator, like the big one in your kitchen, but small enough to fit in a backpack, well, A really big backpack. Jake had filled it with lemonade, soda, and even ice-cold water, so everyone could have a drink while they enjoyed the outdoor kitchen. It wasn't just a kitchen, it was a masterpiece, the best thing Sunny Hills had ever seen. The neighbors couldn't believe their eyes. Mr. Johnson's coffee cup fell to the ground, splash. Mrs. Garcia's gardening gloves dropped from her hands, plop. Little Timmy shouted, "Wow, it's better than a rocket ship." And Sarah said, "It's way cooler than a slide." Even the dogs started barking again, wagging their tails, like they wanted to come in and have a burger, too. But Karen? Oh boy, Karen didn't say a word. Not at first, anyway. Her clipboard slipped from her hands and fell to the ground with a big thud, like a book dropping in a quiet library. Her mouth opened wide, like she was trying to catch flies, and her face turned red, bright red, like a tomato, or like when you're so mad you feel like you might pop. This is, she stammered, her voice all shaky, like when you're trying to talk but you're too surprised to get the words out. Jake crossed his arms, still smiling his big, happy grin. He wasn't scared of Karen, oh no. He wasn't worried about her clipboard or her rules. Nope, Jake was proud, because he knew he'd done something amazing, something nobody could take away. Not against the rules, Karen, he said, his voice calm and strong, like a superhero telling the bad guy, "You lose." I checked. The HOA says no portable grills. But this is a permanent outdoor kitchen. And it's all up to code. Now, let's stop for a second and talk about what Jake said, because he used some big words that might sound confusing. Don't worry, I'll make it super easy, okay? When Jake said portable grills, he meant grills you can move around, like his old one, which had wheels so you could roll it. The HOA rules said you couldn't have those, but Jake's new kitchen wasn't portable. Oh no, it was permanent, which means it's stuck there, like a house or a big tree, it's not going anywhere. And when Jake said up to code, he meant he followed all the big, important rules, not Karen's silly HOA rules, but the real rules, like the ones the city makes to keep everyone safe. Jake had done his homework, you see, and he knew Karen couldn't stop him. The neighbors burst into cheers, clapping, and whistling, like when your team scores a goal at a soccer game, or when you win first place at the school talent show. "Way to go, Jake," shouted Mr. Johnson, waving his empty coffee cup in the air. "It's amazing," cried Mrs. Garcia, clapping her dirty gardening gloves together. "Can we have pizza?" yelled little Timmy, jumping up and down. "And burgers," added Sarah, clapping her hands. Even the dogs barked louder, like they were cheering, too. Karen's smug smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure shock. What does shock mean, you ask? It's when you're so surprised, you can't even move, like when you open a present and find a puppy inside, or when your teacher says, "No homework today." Karen's eyes were wide, her mouth was open, and her face was still red, but now it wasn't just mad red, it was embarrassed red, like when you trip in front of the whole class and everyone laughs. Jake had outsmarted her and he'd done it in style. What does outsmarted mean, you ask? It's when you beat someone by being smarter, like when you win a game of checkers by jumping all their pieces, or when you solve a puzzle before anyone else. Jake had beaten Karen at her own game, and oh boy, it felt so good to watch. But the story doesn't end here, oh no. What happened next? How did Karen react? What did the neighbors do? And how did Jake's amazing outdoor kitchen change Sunny Hills forever? Keep watching, because justice is about to be served, and trust me, it's going to be the best part yet. After that amazing day, everything changed in Sunny Hills. Yep, everything. It was like waking up to a brand new neighborhood, where things were happier, friendlier, and way more fun. Jake's outdoor kitchen, the one with the shiny grills, the pizza oven, the sink, and the twinkling lights, became the talk of the town. What does talk of the town mean, you ask? It's just a fun way of saying everyone was talking about it, like when you get a new puppy and all your friends at school want to hear about it. That's what happened with Jake's outdoor kitchen. Everyone wanted to talk about it, see it, and best of all, visit it. Neighbors begged to come over to Jake's house all the time. Yep, begged. It was like when you really want to go to a friend's house because they have a new video game, and you say, "Please, please, please, can I come over?" That's how the neighbors acted. They wanted to come for BBQs, where Jake would grill juicy burgers and sizzling steaks that smelled so good, your tummy would rumble just thinking about it. They wanted to come for pizza nights, where Jake would bake pizzas in his brick oven, with gooey cheese and pepperoni that tasted better than any pizza place. And they even wanted to come for birthday parties, because Jake's outdoor kitchen was so cool, it was the perfect place to celebrate, with the twinkling lights and the big table under the pergola. Jake was super nice about it, too. He happily invited everyone, well, almost everyone. Guess who didn't get an invitation? Yep, you guessed it, Karen. Oh boy, Jake would just smile and wink at her, saying, "Sorry, Karen. HOA rules say I can only have 10 guests at a time. Guess you'll have to wait your turn." What does wink mean, you ask? It's when you close one eye quick, like you're sharing a secret or being a little sneaky, but in a fun way. Jake wasn't really sorry, of course he was just teasing Karen, because after all the mean things she did, he didn't want her at his BBQs anyway. And Karen? Oh boy, she'd just huff and puff, like a grumpy dragon, and stomp away, her clipboard still in her hands, but with nothing to write down. But the real justice, the really good part came at the next HOA meeting. What's an HOA meeting, you ask? Remember, the HOA is that club in Sunny Hills where a few bossy people, like Karen, make rules for everyone else. An HOA meeting is when all the neighbors get together to talk about those rules, kind of like a class meeting at school where you talk about classroom rules, but way more serious. And oh boy, this meeting was going to be the most exciting one ever. Inspired by Jake's bravery, the neighbors banded together. What does inspired mean, you ask? It's when someone does something so awesome, it makes you want to be awesome, too, like when your friend scores a goal in soccer, and it makes you want to try harder to score one, too. Jake's bravery building that amazing outdoor kitchen and beating Karen at her own game made the neighbors feel brave, too. And what does banded together mean? It's when people team up, like when you and your friends work together to build a giant sandcastle at the beach. That's what the neighbors did, they teamed up to make things better in Sunny Hills. At the HOA meeting, the neighbors all sat in a big room, with chairs lined up like at a school assembly. Karen was there, of course, sitting at the front with her clipboard, thinking she was still the queen of rules. But the neighbors? Oh boy, they had other plans. They decided it was time to rewrite the HOA rules, to make them fairer for everyone. What does fairer mean, you ask? It's when things are equal and nice for everyone, not just for bossy people like Karen. It's like if your teacher says, everyone gets 2 cookies, instead of only my favorite kids get cookies. Fair is better, right? So, the neighbors voted. What does voted mean, you ask? It's when everyone gets to choose something, like when you pick your favorite ice cream flavor, chocolate or vanilla, and the one with the most votes wins. The neighbors voted to change the rules, so people could have fun things in their yards, like grills, flowers, and even swings in trees, without Karen saying, no, no, no. They voted to make rules that were nice, not mean, and that helped everyone, not just Karen. And guess what else they did? Oh boy, this is the best part. They voted to kick Karen out as the HOA president. Yep, you heard that right, Karen was out. What does HOA president mean, you ask? It's the leader of the HOA club, the one who gets to boss everyone around, like the captain of a team, but Karen was a mean captain, not a nice one. The neighbors decided they wanted a new president, someone who actually listened to people, not someone who just yelled and wrote down violations. So, they elected a new HOA president, Mrs. Garcia, the lady who loved purple flowers. What does elected mean, you ask? It's just another word for voted, like choosing the leader of your class to be the line leader or the one who gets to pick the game at recess. Mrs. Garcia was super nice, and she loved listening to people. She said, if you want purple flowers, plant them. If you want a grill, have one. Let's make Sunny Hills a fun place, not a grumpy place. Everyone cheered, clapping their hands, like when your team wins the big game. And Karen? Well, let's just say her days of clipboard tyranny were over. What does tyranny mean, you ask? It's a big word, but it's easy to understand. Tyranny is when someone bosses everyone around in a mean way, like a bully who says, do what I say, or else. Karen's tyranny was done, finished, gone. She was furious, of course. What does furious mean, you ask? It's when you're so mad, you feel like you might explode, like a volcano full of hot lava. Karen's face turned red, her eyes got squinty, and she stomped her foot, but there was nothing she could do. The neighbors had spoken, and they didn't want her rules anymore. As for Jake, oh boy, he finally got to enjoy his backyard the way he wanted. Every weekend, the smell of sizzling steaks and fresh-baked pizza filled the air, floating through sunny hills like a yummy cloud. Neighbors came over, laughing and talking, sitting at the big table under the pergola, sipping lemonade from the mini fridge, and watching the twinkling lights overhead. It was like a big, happy party every weekend, and Jake was the happiest guy in the world, flipping burgers and smiling, because he'd won. And every time Karen walked by, oh boy, she'd see it all. She'd see Jake flipping burgers, surrounded by laughing neighbors, everyone having fun without her silly rules. She'd see the outdoor kitchen, shining in the sun, with its grills and pizza oven and sink, and she'd know she couldn't stop it. And what did Karen do? She just kept walking, her head hung low, like a kid who lost a game and knows they can't play anymore. Her clipboard was still in her hands, but it was empty, because there were no more violations to write down. Sunny Hills was a better place now, thanks to Jake. And the best part? Everyone learned that standing up to mean rules can make things fair and fun for everyone, not just for bossy people like Karen. And there you have it, folks, the super cool story of how Jake Parker turned a silly rule into a big, amazing victory that nobody saw coming. Wasn't that awesome? Let's think about it for a second, okay. Jake seemed like just a regular guy, right? He wasn't loud or super strong like a superhero. He didn't fly or shoot lasers from his eyes. Nope, he was quiet, just a normal guy who worked at a hardware store. But guess what? Sometimes, the people who seem the quietest, the most ordinary, are the ones with the biggest surprises up their sleeves. What does up their sleeves mean, you ask? It's just a fun way of saying they have secret tricks or ideas, like when a magician hides a bunny in his hat, ready to pull it out and surprise everyone. Jake was like that, with his big, awesome secret, his building skills. And what about Karen, the mean rule lady? Oh boy, she tried to push Jake down, didn't she? She tried to boss him around, saying, no, 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 you can't have your grill. But guess what? People who try to push others down, like Karen, are the ones who never see the big surprises coming. Nope, not at all. Karen thought she was the queen of rules, but Jake showed her that being nice and smart is way better than being mean and bossy. So, what's the lesson here? What can we learn from Jake's story? Oh, I'm so glad you asked, because this is the best part. The lesson is, don't let anyone tell you what you can't do. Nope, never. If someone says no, like Karen did to Jake, don't just give up and say, okay, fine. Oh no, do what Jake did, build something bigger, better, and bolder. What does bolder mean, you ask? It's just a fun word for being brave and doing something huge, like building a giant sandcastle instead of a tiny one, or drawing a picture that covers the whole page instead of just a little corner. Jake built a whole outdoor kitchen, not just a grill, and it was way better than what Karen tried to stop. And hey, here's a fun idea: maybe, after you win, invite the mean person over for a burger, just like Jake teased Karen. Why? Because it shows there are no hard feelings. What does no hard feelings mean, you ask? It's when you're not mad anymore, like when your friend accidentally knocks over your block tower, but you say, it's okay, let's build it again together. Being nice, even to mean people, is a super cool way to show you're the bigger person like Jake. Thanks for watching, everyone. Wasn't that story the best? If you loved it, give it a big thumbs up. Yep, just click that little thumb button below. And don't forget to hit that shiny subscribe button, so you can see more awesome stories about everyday heroes like Jake beating the odds. What does beating the odds mean, you ask? It's just a fun way of saying winning, even when things seem hard, like when you win a race even though you started last. Oh, and one last thing, here's a fun question for you to answer in the comments below. Ready? What would you build if someone told you no? Maybe a giant treehouse? Or a super cool skateboard ramp? Or maybe a lemonade stand that's bigger than your whole house? Write it down in the comments, and I can't wait to read what you say. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now, and keep being awesome.